everyone, it's your boy Luke here for our weekly course breakdown, this time for the Copperhead course at Innisbrook for this week's Valspar Championship. Last week at the Players was, let's say, interesting. It was a combination of a whole bunch of emotions. It was frustration, it was of course tiring at times, a little bit disappointing with some of the delays, but at the end ended up being exhilarating, epic, and one heck of an experience in general. Of course, I was there for all 6 days by the end of the week, counting the practice round there on Wednesday. So definitely a draining week from a spectator standpoint. There were times where we were going to and from the course when there was the rain delays and whatnot. Of course, being there an extra day just completely threw off my schedule for the week. But for here, making content, and I'm really excited for this week's golf course and event. I'm not going to be there on Thursday and Friday, but I do expect to be there Saturday and Sunday for the events for this weekend, so looking forward to that. But here in this video, we're going to be previewing the venue, the Copperhead course at Innisbrook, giving you everything you need to know for this week's venue, whether it's going to be a hole-by-hole breakdown, my key stats for analysis, my comp courses for Innisbrook, or of course just the key stats in field in general for this week. We're going to have you completely covered, so look forward to all of that. So whether you're a seasoned golf bettor, somebody who's playing DFS golf, or just a casual golf fan, you're going to be equipped with everything you need to know. All right, first off with some field considerations. We have an 144 golfer field, so typical size for the PGA Tour these days. Some of the notables are pretty notable. We include JT, Victor Hovland, Colin Morikawa, Xander Schauffele, Dustin Johnson, Louis Oosthuizen, coming in off a very shaky weekend, we'll say that. Also Terrell Hatton, Shane Lowry, Sam Burns, Brooks Koepka, Abraham Ancer, Jason Kokrak, a few other Euros such as Tommy Fleetwood and Matt Fitzpatrick. Just a lot of solid players, and there were expected to be a lot of withdrawals at the beginning of the week, and there, except a few notables, right, like Paul Casey, who did pull out, a few others in that mid-tier range. You really still have a stacked field, so I'm excited to see that. It's really making it interesting, an event I actually want to see there on the weekend. So again, we'll see who makes the cut there on Thursday and Friday, and if it's an interesting tournament, I'll definitely be making my way over there because we have all these studs in the field. The cut line will be the top 65 in ties as per usual. Last year that resulted in a -1 cut. It's typically in the -1 to +1 range. Sometimes we've had more difficult years, and when we go through the past champs, that'll become especially evident. Last year was an easier year. Sam Burns won at -17, but then you had difficult years when Paul Casey won at -8 or even -10, where the cut line was even par and over par there, +1 one of those years. Adam Hadwin won the year before those, back-to-back wins for Casey at -14. Schwartzel won at -7, another difficult year, and Spieth won all the way back there in 2014 or 2015 at -10. Just really a wide range of scores. It's either going to be close to 9 to 10 under par, maybe even a little bit lower than that, or close to 16 to 17 under par. Of course, a lot of that comes down to the Florida weather, which can be extremely volatile from day to day, as we saw at the Players Championship. So we'll have to keep an eye on the weather come the end of the week, but assuming that we're going to have calm weather for all 4 days, I would expect a winner in the range of 15 to 20 under par. If you get a little bit of weather, it could be close to 10 or even 5 under par if we get some really nasty weather. So that's it for the field for this week. Let's go ahead and hop into the course details now. So like I said before, we have the Copperhead course at Innisbrook Resort over there in Tampa, Florida, more specifically Palm Harbor, Florida, but that's just the coastal part of Tampa. It is a Larry Packard designed par 71, which is slightly unique, we'd say, because it does have 5 par 3s and the usual allotment of par 5s. So even though it is a par 71, we still get the usual amount of par 5s, which keeps them extremely important in our modeling. The scorecard yardage is going to be closer to 7,300 yards this year. In fact, 7,340 is what we got from the PGA Tour. And the greens here really are the thing to note, because this golf course, from a pure just visual standpoint, looks like every country club. It has tree-lined fairways. It actually has elevation, which for a Florida course you probably wouldn't expect, but it was built, I believe, on an old dump from like 40, 50 years ago, and it has a lot of undulation to it, because in Florida you're not going to get any undulation unless it's man-made, and that is the case with this golf course, but you wouldn't know that it was built on a dump if you were to take a look at it from a first glance, because of course it's beautiful, has tons of foliage and whatnot, and that's really why players like coming here. It's an elite golf course, particularly from the visual standpoint, but in terms of setup, the only real defense are these greens, which in terms of their size, they're 5,796 yards on square foot on average, which isn't all that massive, right? You're talking about the average on tour being right around 6,000 square feet, so maybe slightly smaller than average, but the green speeds will run in the 12.5 to 13.5 on the Stimpmeter. Last year they ran close to 13.5 for all 4 days, which is quite fast, right? They're going to cause quite a few 3-putts for these players when they're at that pace. They're also Bermuda, but at this time of year, they moved the whole Florida swing up about a month or two in the schedule. You're going to get the usual Tiff Eagle Bermuda, but also an overseed of bent/POA. And last year was just POA Trivalous, but very could well see some bent grass out there. In general, though, we're going to be treating these greens like Bermuda grass greens. There's a few other surfaces on the tour, like what you have over there at PGA West, TPC San Antonio, also over there for TPC Sawgrass, PGA National, that have the same mixture of grasses, but from time to time over the year, it changes in terms of which grass is dominant, right? So it's kind of hard to get a grasp on that type of putting. So in general, we're going to be looking at Bermuda grass splits. In terms of the fairways, we have relatively small fairways. They're 28 yards wide on average. Also going to be Bermuda. It's going to be Celebration Bermuda grass. Same thing with the rough, which is also a little bit gnarly. It's a 3 to 3.5 inch range, which isn't anything close to what we saw at TPC Sawgrass or, of course, at the API, where it was close to 5.5, 6 inches by week's end. But still, when you get Bermuda grass that's over 2 inches long, you're going to get a little bit of a penalty. And while it isn't going to be anything drastic, you still want to be putting yourself in the short grass that also has a rye overseed on it. In terms of elevation change, like I said before, it has 29 yards of elevation change over the property, which for a Florida golf course is the most you're going to see. And that's completely man-made. Like I said, there's one side of the golf course that is much higher than the other. On the first tee of the par 5, you're hitting down a massive elevation change. So even though it's almost a 600-yard par 5, it plays much closer to like 550 yards. It's reachable for almost the entire field that hits the fairway there. And then you have par 5s that go up the hill, like what you have 6 or 7 or something like that, where you have the Copperhead logo on it. And it's very, very difficult. So it really goes both ways. Elevation does come into play here, which makes me think a little bit about Quail Hollow, which is another golf course that I've walked plenty of times. And you have all that elevation change. You have the tree-lined fairways. It's a difficult golf course where you got to be able to hit some long irons, which is definitely the case here as well. Let's move on to the weather impact, which of course down here in Florida is going to be present. Whenever there's strong winds, they're really hard to gauge. Because of all the tree-lined fairways here, you're not going to get an open look at the wind, and oftentimes you won't feel any wind on the ground. And when you get the ball elevated closer to the height of the trees around you, it starts to get buffeted by it and can really make an impact when the weather gets nasty. So as per usual with the Florida course, we're going to have to pay attention to that come weekend. Now let's go ahead and hop into a hole-by-hole analysis to give you an idea of exactly the strategy these players are going to be implementing. Alright guys, on the screen you can see the Pro Visualizer tool, what we use to go hole by hole for these golf courses. And this is going to be the Copperhead course at Innisbrook. Hole number 1 is that par 5 I was talking about, which here they have it playing 556. They're really going to have it playing a little bit longer, I would assume, maybe closer to 580 yards. But either way, it's a massively downhill shot. You can see here it has only 11 yards downhill, but in person, it seems a lot larger than that. People are going to be hitting some massive drives in the 350 to 360 range off the tee and setting up really short shots into the green. I mean, something close to mid-irons for some of the long players on tour. So if you go ahead and take a look at the second shot here, even if you only get it out there 300 yards, say you decide to lay back, you're only going to have 260 into the green. So if you wanted to take maybe a 3-wood off the tee and a 5-wood into the green, that's also something that players can do. But the green is hard to hit. It looks massive here on the map here, but both bunkers come into play. It's also got plenty of undulation to it. So you're going to see some eagles at this hole for some of those longer players on tour that are maybe coming in with a mid-iron rather than that 5-wood for the people that are laying up. But either way, you're looking to get a birdie there, because this golf course, for as many birdie opportunities as it's going to give you, as we'll see here with the strategy, it also has quite a bit of holes that are going to bite you back. And hole number 2 is a hole that you definitely can birdie. It's relatively short. It's only about 400 yards. This water on the right does come into play. It's one of the rare holes where you're going to see water in play off the tee. But on the second shot here, you're looking at a wedge. Pretty much even if you lay up with an iron in this 270 range like we have here on the tool, going to have a pitching wedge at most into this green. So also a hole that you're looking to take advantage of. But unfortunately, with hole number 3, you get introduced to the real teeth of this golf course. It's only 450 yards here, but because of this water on the right, you have a forced layup. So even though Pro Visualizer has it a little bit more aggressive down here towards 280, you're going to see a lot of players just hit iron off the tee. Guys are going to lay up a little bit further back, which makes the shot into the green, which is usually, they have it at 164, probably closer to 180, even 190. You've heard a lot of players over the years talk about the importance of hitting long irons at this golf course. That is the exact reason why. The scorecard yardage is only close to 73.50 yards, which isn't anything crazy, right? It's maybe a little bit more than the tour average, at least for a par 71. But at the same time, with all these forced layups, it plays much closer to 7,600 yards. So there's definitely a little bit of a distance factor in play, not necessarily with your off the tee play because you are clubbing down so much, but into greens, right? Guys with higher club head speed also are able to hit shorter irons into these greens, and they have much lower dispersion with those shorter irons. That's just physics. That's just how that works with the loft and whatnot. The lower loft that you have, the longer you're trying to hit it, the more dispersion you're going to have left to right. Whereas when you have more loft, you're hitting it higher into the air. You have less room for it to move left and right. So that's just something that you're going to see here. That's why players that are longer have had success, like a Paul Casey. He's not known as a bomber by any means, but he's also somebody that's well above the tour average with his distance. And obviously that pays off here, particularly with some of those long irons. Hole number 4 is a long iron because it's a long par 3. It's only 188 yards. The pros will maybe play it over here closer to 195 yards because last year the shortest par 3 on the golf course was 195 yards. So I would expect them to play this a little bit longer than the 188 they have here on the tool here. In general, these par 3s are extremely demanding. They're all protected by plenty of bunkers. They also have plenty of undulation. And like I said, this is the shortest of the bunch here. Going to play closer to 195 yards. Hole number 5 is also a par 5. It's the second of the 2 on the front 9, but this is the one that goes up the hill. So it's hole number 5. I thought it was 7 before, so slightly off with my arrangement of this golf course. But in general, this is a 3-shotter for even the longest players on tour. Even Bryson DeChambeau probably won't be able to reach this in 2 if he were playing it. It's 610 yards, again, up the hill, like I said. It's a solid, it only has it 3 yards uphill, but it's much steeper than that. I'm not quite sure what they're saying with that. It's a much steeper hill than that. It's probably in general at least 20 yards uphill. So it plays closer to maybe 630 yards in general. It's a completely blind shot. So even for your layup, it's extremely hard to hit the fairway. So even getting it out there 270 with your drive, 240 with maybe a 5-wood up here, you're left with a wedge in. But more often than not, players are over here in the right rough, or of course they hook it over here on the left, and they're left with a really hard recovery shot into this par 5, and you are going to see people bogey this hole. It's pretty unbelievable to see some of these PGA Tour pros bogey these par 5s, especially when there's not even water in play on the hole. Of course, that water is more cosmetic towards the tee than anything that you saw there at the beginning. So in general, this is a difficult par 5 and not really a birdie opportunity unless you hit 2 perfect shots to set up a wedge into the green. Hole number 6 is another toughie. In general, it's got one of the smaller fairway landing areas out there. So let's go ahead and zoom in on this drive. You can see it pinches the further and further that you get out here. These trees also get more and more into play. So even though it's only 450 yards, if you hit a perfect drive, I suppose you're left with a short iron. You could make a birdie here, but a lot of guys are going to lay up off the tee because it's so thin over there, lay up to the fatter part of the fairway, and leave themselves a long iron in. Again, another hole where having that distance or having the ability to hit that 175 to 200 yard shot is going to come extremely handy. This is another hole where that's the case. You can see the further and further we get into the fairway here, the more and more the fairway is narrow. So we've talked about this before in the strategy, how off the tee distance can sometimes be advantageous. This is not the case with Innisbrook. Like I said, that distance factor is much more important into the greens because you get penalized the longer you hit it. They just tend to pinch more and more. That's how they like to set it up here at Innisbrook, whether it's for your casual players or these PGA Tour players. So this is also a hole where people will lay up. A lot of them will hit driving iron out here to about 280 yards and leave a pitching wedge in. So it's not like it's a difficult hole, but if you decide to try and push it out there 320, 330 yards, like some of these elite distance players can, like a Dustin Johnson, you bring the bunker into play. You also bring the forest left and right into play, of course, as well, with more dispersion with the driver. So most people are going to lay up. This is one of those golf courses where experience and having a strategy most certainly comes into play. The next par 3 on the front 9 is 232 yards. It's got bunkering. It's extremely long. It's exposed to the wind more than most holes out here, with a little bit less tree foliage than a lot of them. So it's real tough, right? It's long iron shot. You're going to see some guys even hit hybrids into this green. You're just hoping to get out there with a par at best. Hole number 9 is as straightforward as a par 4 as you're going to get here at Innisbrook. It's a slate dogleg left to right. You got bunkering on the left and right side of this green. You are going to see some people lay up just because of these bunkers. If some of the longer hitters can take them out of the play with driver, but of course then that brings the left and right miss into play. These trees over here on the right can block out most of your misses. If you miss in the right side of this bunker, a lot of people are going to end up just having to pitch out. If you miss left, it's slightly more appealing because there's not a ton of trees over here, right? You can kind of get away with it. So some of the longer hitters are going to see an advantage on this hole, particularly the ones that could take these bunkers out of play. But a lot of the field will be trying to hit a hybrid or a 3-wood down there, try to keep it in play, and also hit into a relatively undulated green. So 9, even though it's a relatively short hole and only 420 yards, not really the birdie opportunity that it looks like on paper. Hole number 10, if you're starting on hole number 10 rather than hole number 1, it is not nearly the same handshake as what you're getting there with the easiest hole in the golf course with hole number 1, particularly because it's 450 yards. It plays slightly uphill. It also deals with a ton of, let's just show you the bunkering. I mean, first off, the bunker on the left is one of the most hit into on the entire golf course. It's massive. It has a massive lip on it as well. So it's one of the few bunkers here at this golf course where if you hit into it, you might have a hard time getting out of it. On the right over here, you have the densest patch of forest on the entire golf course. It's an immediate pitch out no matter what over there. You can see it's right next to the fairway. A lot of times, like you have over here on the left, you have some room to get away with an array shot, but over here on the right, you have no room for error whatsoever. So this is not nearly as easy a hole as number 1. You're just hoping to get out of here with a par. Hole number 11 is a par 5. It is gettable. You can see that it's relatively flat. It's 564 yards. Not everybody's going to be reaching it in 2. It's not that short, but if you have average distance, it is more than gettable. It also has one of the larger greens on the golf course as well. A lot of times they put the pin over here on the front right for Sunday, back left for some of the more scoreable days like Saturday, all that sort of stuff. This is definitely a birdie opportunity. So like I said, there are some birdie opportunities out there. Hole number 12, it's only 375 yards, but this is another forced layup, so it's not nearly as easy as a hole as it looks like on paper. There's no real conceivable way to try and drive it up near the green because it just brings way too much risk into play. Because not only is the water over here on the right, this forest over here on the left is a complete no-go. So like Pro Visualizer says, 230 yards out there in the middle of the fairway will be what most of these players end up doing. And this green is extremely hard to putt on. So it's also a tough birdie, even if you keep yourself in position. Hole 13 was Keegan Bradley's undoing last year. He hit the ball in the water over here, completely sunk his chances of winning this golf tournament. On the other hand, Sam Burns hit it to like 5 feet and made birdie. So this is pretty much the signature hole of the golf course. It has the lake in play. The pin locations can be extremely devilish towards the weekend. And if you're looking for a place to post up at this golf course, hole 13 is not a bad spot. It also tends to be pretty fun over that way. Hole 14, they give you a chance to get your birdie back, but it's not going to be given to you. It's almost a 600-yard par 5. So even the longest hitters on tour are going to struggle to reach in 2. And if you try to go for it and you have any type of mishit, this water on the right does come into play. And of course, these 2 wooded areas. So this is not an easy par 5, but like any par 5 in general, if you can hit 2 good layup shots, you're going to have a wedge into a relatively easy green, right? The par 5s are the easiest greens on most of these golf courses. So you should at least be able to get out of there with a birdie if you have a decent hole. Hole 15 is another tough par 3. It doesn't really have water in play. It's more cosmetic than anything there. This is a hole that you can make birdie on down the stretch, but at the same time, it's 200 yards. It got it really nut up and hit a good 3-iron, 4-iron out there for some of these long players, and it's still not an easy hole for that reason. Now you get to the snake pit. So we're at 16 through 18 now. This is the hardest stretch at this golf course. One of the harder stretches on the PGA Tour. We've had a few of them over the last few times. 16, 17, 18 at TPC Sawgrass. You have the Bear Trap over there at the Honda Classic. The API, I believe, doesn't have a stretch like that, but you guys get the point. It's another one of those stretches of golf. It's relatively hard par 4 here. Water the complete way down the right. A ton of people are going to miss left here, and unfortunately, it's a dense forest. Tiger Woods was famously behind this tree over here, had to hit a hook shot onto the green, was successfully able to do so, but a lot of players are going to miss even further left than that because they're so scared of this water, which is certainly in play off the tee, and have pitch outs, and you got to get up and down for a par. This is going to play as the hardest hole on the golf course pretty much every single round. Number 17 is a tough par 3. It's another over 200 yard par 3. Tough green, plenty of bunkers in play. Pretty average though, because it is straight at you, as most par 3s are. And then hole number 18, 435 yards. It looks easy. It plays uphill though, so it plays much longer than this 435. And all of these bunkers are just horrendous. So much like the bunker that we saw a few holes ago, that's relatively deep. These pop bunkers on the right are deep as hell. They're hard to get out of. Over here on the left, the same thing. And a lot of players end up in them. It's like they have magnets in them. This hole tends to crush a lot of people's dreams. So making sure you get it out there in the fairway, set yourself up with at least a scoreable iron into this elevated, toughly undulated green is going to be key, because it's the end of the snake pit. It tends to differentiate the winner every single year here, and I would not be surprised at all if you see somebody down the stretch make a double or even a triple bogey at this hole. When you get into some of these bunkers here on the right, sometimes you have a pitch out at the very best. Then if you miss that green up there, you have a hard time getting up and down. So it can bring some really nasty numbers into play. All right, and now for our key stats for analysis this week. And number 1, we have shots gained approach, which of course, I know it's a shocker, right? Another week with shots gained approach up top, but that is really what we're looking at here at the Valspar Championship. Like I said before, the reliance on the long irons from 175 to 200 and the 200 plus yard range are going to be things to hunker down on this week for sure. In terms of our modeling, which I'll cover in full detail during our core picks video, I'll show you guys the breakdown in terms of the weighting. Those two are by far the most weighted in that category. Next up, we have shots gained putting, which is a little bit murky this week. Like I said before, we're dealing with surfaces that aren't necessarily consistent from year to year. It's always mainly Bermuda grass, but sometimes we have hints of bent grass in it. Sometimes it's got a little bit of POA in it. Last year, it was just POA and the Bermuda grass that's dominant. This year, I would expect the same, right? Even if they go back to a little bit of bent grass in the mixture, it's not really going to change the surfaces all that much. It's the same thing they do at PGA West for the stadium courts. They do TPC Sawgrass, PGA National, also Austin Country Club, where they're going to do the match play, TPC San Antonio. So it's something that these guys see a healthy amount every single year. And there's a few guys that putt particularly well on the surface that in DFS for outright betting are going to be a little bit interesting this week. The main one that comes to mind, the guy that is just an absolute animal on this surface, is Keegan Bradley behind. Believe it or not, it's strange. The guy just seems to have it figured out. So that is something that we'll also be taking a look at. And lastly, at number 3, we have driving accuracy percentage. This is a golf course that is relatively long, so you'd think that just shots gained off the tee would be what we're looking at, but there's definitely a much higher emphasis on driving accuracy this week than there is on driving distance. Because of all of the forced layups, driving distance can almost be erased for some of the field, right? Because these guys are going to have to be laying up to specific spots of certain fairways. There are some holes where you can get out there with the driver, like the long par 5s in particular, where having that driving distance is going to be advantageous. So of course, it's still going to be in my modeling. Right? We'll cover that here with my other key stats. But driving accuracy, especially on those holes where you're laying up, is going to be where you really make your hay. Because some of the iron shots here are so difficult in that 175 to 200 or the 200 plus yard range, making sure you're in the fairway is even more so important. You got that Bermuda grass rough I was talking about before. Even though it's only going to be right around 3 inches, it's still more than penal, right? You don't want to be in that for those long iron shots. And of course, if you're missing into the trees, which you also saw come into play on plenty of the holes here, that could be an issue. Or of course, the water that's in play on a few of the tee shots. So in general, we are looking at guys that can keep the ball in the short grass, but most importantly, like we saw there at number 1 and 2, guys that can hit their irons well and fill it up on these weird surfaces that we see from time to time. A few other key stats that I'm looking at. Number 1 would be driving distance, right? So it just didn't make the cut there in the top 5. It is important, especially for some of those longer holes, but not as important as driving accuracy. We're also taking a look at recent form, mainly players that have played well over the last 3 to 4 events specifically, so the last 12 to 16 measured rounds. In general, we've heard a lot of players coming out of this event and a lot of the pressers, interviews, talk about how you got to be coming into form into this event, right? How you're not going to compete here if you don't have your game already. It's a true test of golf. You got to be good in pretty much every single category to succeed at the Valspar Championship. Maybe outside or around the green play, it is a relatively easy course to get up and down at, so you might be able to give people a pass in that category, but outside of that, you pretty much got to be able to do everything here. There's also the factor with experience at Copperhead. So I'm taking a look at shots gained at Copperhead. A lot of players have talked about an experience factor here. It's a relatively difficult golf course. A lot of that comes down to the strategy, the forced layups and whatnot, and knowing where to hit the ball to set yourself up into these greens is extremely important. So I'll be looking at shots gained at this golf course in general and the guys that have had success over the years here. Also taking a look at par 5 scoring, par 3 scoring a little bit more this week, with them being a little bit more important this week and then most weeks, right? There's one less par 4, one extra par 3. Still the 4 par 5s that we're looking at. Also taking a look at shots gained at Copperhead. Like I said before, that's the experience factor, and shots gained at the comp courses, which we're going to go ahead and get into right now. All right, and lastly, the 3 courses I compare the most to what we're going to see this week. Number 1, we have Quail Hollow Golf Club, which is another golf course that I mentioned before has that elevation factor where you're going to have plenty of blind shots, plenty of downhill shots, particularly into some of these par 3s, which makes being able to account for that something that many of the best players in the field, the people that win there year after year, have shown prowess at. It's also a golf course that prioritizes your long iron play. That 175 to 200, that 200 plus yard range. You have the tree-lined fairways. From a visual perspective, the golf courses are almost identical. So definitely a golf course that I'm using as a comp this week. Next up, we have East Lake Golf Club, another golf course with infamously difficult fairways to hit. Also, a lot of reliance on the long iron play. Among the elite tier courses when it comes to the 175 to 200 and the 200 plus yard range, the same deal that we have here at Copperhead. And lastly, TPC Southwind, which is another decently tough track. It has a little bit more water in play than all of these other comps. It also prioritizes precision off the tee though, right? So that's something that's important at this golf course, mostly due to setting up angles into greens. But if you're missing fairways at TPC Southwind, you're dealing with penalty shots, right? So it's maybe a different way that we get to that type of skill set, but definitely the same skill set that's being emphasized at that golf course. And we're also taking a look at the weather factor, right? TPC Southwind, it does have the tree-lined fairways at times, but at times it's really hard to gauge the wind. Same factor, the same thing here this week. You also have that factor at Quail Hollow and at East Lake Golf Club, which is also another reason that I like all 3 of these venues as comps. That is all I've got for this course breakdown video. Before you go on and get out of here, let me know down in the comments what you think the winning score is going to be this week. I'm going to go ahead and take 16 under par, one worse than what we saw last year. I think the Florida weather comes into play for at least one of these rounds, but given the field strength, just the amount of studs we have out there, I think somebody takes this place decently low. But go ahead and let me know down in the comments what winning score you've got. Again, in the past, we've seen it as high as 7 under par when Schwartzel won, so quite a large range there. Would love to hear from you guys down below. And as per usual, going to have even more content coming throughout the week, whether it's for DraftKings, DFS, Showdown, Prize Picks, our weekly DFS live stream at 7 on Wednesday. We'll have you guys covered. Of course, it's a little bit delayed this week because of the Monday finish, me having to travel back, get back into town, but we'll be pumping all of that out to you over the next day here, so look forward to all of that. Make sure to like the video if you haven't already. Make sure you're subscribed to the Gsluke DFS channel here if you haven't already as well. That way you don't miss any of that content to come. And of course, all the content for tournaments to come this year. I look forward to this week, guys. Good luck with any lineups, bets that you're firing this week. Let's get this cash in. I'll see you guys later for some of that content.